Okay, I got some great news. Just in case you missed it, Young Guns 3 is a go. The governor of New Mexico actually issued a press release stating that Young Guns 3, Dead or Alive, will be filmed in New Mexico, just like Guns 1 and 2. Not only that, but she also confirmed that Emilio Estevez will be reprising the role of Billy the Kid, quote, alongside original cast members Lou Diamond Phillips and Christian Slater. Look, if you're anything like me, this is huge news. I had both of these movies pretty much memorized by the time I was 12 years old, okay? I had the Bon Jovi soundtrack. Hell, me and my friends even played Young Guns at recess back in elementary school. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I've heard from a lot of people throughout the years, roughly around my same age, who have similar memories. I am a firm believer that the Young Guns franchise absolutely defined an entire new generation of Western fans. And I fully expect Young Guns 3 not only to meet, but to exceed expectations. Now, that said, you may be wondering how this is possible, especially considering that Emilio Estevez is currently in his early 60s, and the real-life Billy the Kid was shot dead when he was around 21 years of age. Also, didn't Chavez and Rudabaugh, the characters portrayed by Lou Diamond Phillips and Christian Slater, didn't they both die in Guns 2? I mean, how can they make a part 3 when all of the main characters are already dead? Well, the answer clearly is Brushy Bill Roberts. We're introduced to Mr. Roberts at the very beginning of Young Guns 2, when he's standing there next to his mule waiting on that lawyer. He narrates the entire movie, and we see him again at the very end. And yes, Brushy Bill Roberts, real name Oliver Roberts, was indeed a real person. He came forward in the late 1940s claiming to be Billy the Kid, and he even met with the governor of New Mexico in 1950, trying to obtain the pardon that was promised to Billy way back in 1879. And by the way, Brushy Bill playing an important role in Young Guns 3, that's not just my opinion. It was until a few days ago, but thankfully, Emilio Estevez has recently confirmed my suspicions. More on that in just a moment, but before we go any further, I don't want to mislead anyone, so let me be perfectly clear. I do not have access to the script for Young Guns 3. I don't possess any leaked information. I don't have any insider secrets, nothing like that. What I do have is a little bit of knowledge concerning the real-life Brushy Bill Roberts, as well as Billy the Kid and several of the kid's closest associates, like Jose Chavez y Chavez and David Rudabaugh. I also want to state for the record that I do not personally believe that Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid, okay? I've looked at all the evidence extensively, and I am beyond confident that Billy met his end at Fort Sumner on July 14th, 1881. However, in the Young Guns universe, Brushy Bill and Billy Bonney are most definitely one and the same. So yeah, while the real Billy the Kid may have died back in 1881, that has nothing to do with what we're discussing today, okay? In the Young Guns universe, Billy not only survived, but he'd go on to live another 70 years. All right, so with that preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss Brushy Bill Roberts, specifically his life post-1881. Don't worry, this will be a very quick overview just to give you an idea of Brushy's various adventures, and then we'll discuss the plot of Young Guns 3. I promise, you got my word on that. And hey, if you're the impatient sort, I do have a timestamp down below, so you can just skip forward if the spirit moves you. Okay, so first of all, Billy's escape from Fort Sumner was not quite as peaceful as they made it seem in Guns 2. Remember, in the movie, Billy and Garrett have that little come-to-Jesus moment there at Fort Sumner. Pat decides not to kill him, and Billy just slips quietly off into the sunset, after stealing Pat's horse. Well, according to Brushy Bill Roberts, things were a bit more violent. There was a fight. Garrett ended up killing a Mexican whose body he then passed off as the kid's, and as Brushy was making his getaway, he too was shot multiple times. One of the bullets hit him in the left jaw, another creased the top of his head, and yet another tore through his shoulder. But he was able to make it out alive. He then slipped down into Old Mexico and sought refuge among the indigenous. He emerged in the fall of 1882, got him a job in Texas driving a wagon, but ultimately returned to Mexico until the winter of the following year. It was then that Brushy returned to Texas and started working as a cowboy. Quote, I returned to Texas as the Texas Kid. I worked a short time at the Powers Cattle Company. From there, I went up to Decatur, Texas, where I struck up again with Indian Jim. While on a cattle drive in Kansas City, I was arrested and held by the law as being Billy the Kid. The boys got me off, though, end quote. No details are given as to who exactly the boys were, but following this escape, Brushy drifted north to the Black Hills. It was there where he and his buddy Indian Jim worked as scouts protecting the stagecoaches. This was also when he earned the nickname of Brushy, on account of riding the, quote, brushy hills of the Dakotas. He also claimed to have worked on Buffalo Bill Cody's ranch down in Nebraska during this same period, in addition to having various adventures as far west as Idaho, where he, quote, defied any man to beat me to the draw. Skip ahead to the spring of 1888, and Roberts signed on with the infamous Pinkerton Detective Agency. Then later on that fall, he joined the Anti-Horse Thief Association in Texas. Quote, we rode up and down the Red River in East Texas and Indian Territory. We rode up the Ozark Trail in Missouri before we quit. I investigated many cases of counter-branding. Several times with some quick shooting, I shot the branding iron from the hands of a thief. Now, Brushy would continue working in law enforcement in various capacities for around the next 2 decades. In addition to the Pinkertons, he served as a deputy U.S. Marshal for Hanging Judge Parker, as well as continuing his association with the anti-horse thief outfit. There were many close calls. Brushy had run-ins with the train robber Al Jennings, Cherokee Bill, and even the notorious Dalton Gang. He and his fellow deputies cleaned out Robbers Roost up in Utah and even helped to put an end to the Crazy Snake Rebellion in present-day Oklahoma. He would take a brief respite from chasing bad guys at some point in the late 1880s to win first place at the Cheyenne Roundup. This is a big theme throughout Brushy's entire life, by the way, rodeos and working with horses, even from when he was a young child. To hear Brushy tell it, he was somewhat of a savant when it came to the ponies. He followed up this victory at the rodeo by attending a boxing school in Ohio. Per Brushy, quote, in January 1890, Indian Jim sent me to a boxing school in Cincinnati where I trained. I was tired of riding outlaw horses, and I thought I would like to be a boxer. I was left-handed and fast, but they put me in the ring with a long-armed feller, and I decided my arms were too short to continue boxing. I went back to Oklahoma and rode horses again in my spare time. We kept riding the anti-horse thief trail, end of quote. And yeah, like I mentioned a moment ago, for the next few years, Brushy's life was mostly centered around competing in various rodeos, from Idaho to Oregon, even down in Old Mexico. Hell, he was so good that by 1893, he got invited to Argentina to school the locals on how to break Mustangs. Then there was a trip to the Shetland Islands to catch wild ponies. Quote, they were hard to rope in that brush. They would run like rabbits. We spent about 3 months catching some 150 head of ponies. When we came back, we joined up again with the Anti-Horse Thief Association in Indian Territory. End of quote. Sadly, it was there in the territory where his good buddy Mountain Bill lost his life after being ambushed along the Canadian River. Brushy and Jim then drifted south of the border and began working on their very own ranch. Or at least they did until the Spanish-American War broke out. And you can probably guess what happens next. Brushy and Jim enlisted with the Rough Riders under Teddy Roosevelt. And just as soon as they got to Cuba, they started working as scouts. This was not an easy assignment, and Brushy would end up seeing more than his fair share of combat. He'd even describe watching his fellow scouts being shot on each side of him. This lasted a couple of months before he and Jim were able to finagle their way into the much safer job of breaking horses for the Army. Be that as it may, though, he and his commanding officers just did not see eye to eye. And when a few of them ended up shot in the back, it was Brushy Bill and Jim who were accused of pulling the trigger. Roberts denied the charges, but he would ultimately receive what he described as a bobtail discharge, which, if I'm not mistaken, is just a nice way of saying dishonorable discharge. Either way, they would return to Mexico following the war, only to have their property seized by the government. Oh no. Brushy put up a fight. Of course he did. This dude was a total badass. But when reinforcements arrived, in the form of around 2,000 federales, he and his buddies were forced to just blast their way out, which they did. And after a running gunfight that lasted over a week, they finally arrived safely in Texas. Brushy said that his ranch at that time was worth around $30,000. But once he got back to the States, all he had to his name was his horse and his saddle. Other than that, he was just flat out broke. But hey, when life gives you lemons, right? Rather than wallow in self-pity, Brushy just dusted himself off and started his very own Wild West show. He doesn't really offer up much in the way of details, but this was a traveling show. In fact, there are some who think that he performed as far away as New York City. Brushy also claimed to have starred in similar shows with Buffalo Bill Cody and Pawnee Bill. Nonetheless, by 1907, he was once again back in Mexico, just in time for the revolution. Quote, "We joined Carranza's men, and later with Pancho Villa. I was captain of 106 men, all mounted on steel dust horses from our ranch. Our steel dust horses could outdistance the Spanish ponies of the Federals. We left Mexico in 1914, coming across the border at Brownsville, Texas. The Mexican Revolution broke us up. We lost everything we had." End of quote. And yeah, after that is when Brushy sort of settled down. He spent the next few decades residing in Van Zant County, Texas, just working odd jobs. And it wasn't until a few years before his death that he and his wife finally moved to the town of Hyco, where that lawyer found him. And as I mentioned earlier, they were able to secure a meeting with the governor of New Mexico, Thomas Mabry. And really, Brushy was just hoping to clear his name, to get that pardon that Lew Wallace had promised Billy the Kid way back when. Quote, "I done wrong just like everyone else in those days. I have lived a good life since I left New Mexico. I have been a useful citizen. I want to die a free man. I do not want to die like Garrett and the rest of them, by the gun. I have been hiding so long and they have been telling so many lies about me that I want to get everything straightened out before I die." Okay, but only problem was the governor wasn't buying it, and neither was anyone else. The entire meeting turned out to be a bit of a circus. There were journalists, historians, flashing cameras, hell, even two of Pat Garrett's own sons were in attendance, so not a very welcoming atmosphere, to say the least. And in the end, Brushy was denied the pardon. Then, just 3 weeks later, he died on the streets of Hyco, Texas. He was buried in nearby Hamilton at the Oakwood Cemetery, and to this very day, his gravestone bears the name Billy the Kid. And yeah, that's Brushy Bill Roberts in a nutshell. Now, we will discuss the plot of Young Guns 3, I promise. Trust me, it's worth the wait. I think you're going to be really surprised, just like I was. But first, I do think we need to also take a quick look at Jose Chavez y Chavez and Arkansas Dave Rudabaugh, who, as it turns out, was never actually known as Arkansas Dave. Remember, it has been confirmed by multiple sources, including Emilio Estevez, that both Lou Diamond Phillips and Christian Slater are returning for Guns 3. Keep in mind that we didn't actually see them die in Part 2. Their deaths were strongly suggested. Chavez is mortally wounded, he collapses on the ground, and then he sees that spirit horse. And then we see Rudabaugh flee to Mexico as the locals begin sharpening their machetes. As far as the historical record is concerned, though, the real Dave Rudabaugh was indeed killed in Parral, Mexico on February of 1886. We even have photographic evidence in the form of Dave's severed head being displayed on a pike. So I'm not really sure how they're going to get around that in Part 3, but hey, that's Hollywood, right? If you don't see them die on camera, if we don't physically see their souls leaving their bodies, then they're not officially dead. And remember, we didn't actually see Christian Slater get beheaded. It was merely suggested. Chavez is a bit different. Unlike in Guns 2, he would go on to live all the way up until 1924. By the way, the real Jose Chavez was much meaner than portrayed in the movies. If you ever get a chance, check out his mugshot. This was not a guy you'd want to bump into in a dark alley. Chavez was a legitimately scary dude, and a legitimate killer. He'd even go on to become a killer for hire following the Lincoln County War. Believe it or not, he was actually a deputy in Las Vegas, New Mexico. A crooked deputy, but he did wear a badge nonetheless. He even had a showdown with Bob Ford, same guy who killed Jesse James. I guess Bob didn't want none of what Chavez was offering, so rather than take his chances, he split for Colorado. It was also there in Vegas where Jose started running with Vicente Silva. Now, Silva's a really interesting guy in his own right. By day, he was a respectable citizen, a business owner, and by night, he ran a very organized gang of criminals. These guys had regular meetings, they had a treasurer, the whole 9 yards. Eventually, Silva contracted a few of his men to murder his own wife, one of whom allegedly was Jose Chavez, and there are even some who think that it was Chavez who assassinated Vicente Silva. Either way, Chavez would be convicted of a different murder, one that he most likely did commit, and sentenced to life in prison. He'd only serve around 11 years, though, before receiving a pardon in January 1909. Apparently, he helped out a few guards during a riot, so they cut him a break. And for the rest of his life, Chavez kept mostly to the straight and narrow, dying in 1924 at the age of 72. The only other member of Billy's gang that was still alive by the end of Young Guns 2 was William Henry French, portrayed by the great Alan Ruck. Now, Ruck's character was not a real person. He was mostly a composite, I assume, loosely based on the real-life Jim French and maybe Henry Newton Brown, both of whom were participants in the Lincoln County War. Brown would end up fleeing the territory and pinning on a badge, and by all accounts, he was a well-respected lawman. Or at least he was until the spring of '84, when he robbed a bank over in Medicine Lodge. He and his companions were caught and then summarily hanged by the necks until they were dead. As for Jim French, he's a lot more mysterious. According to historian Mark Boardman, no one knows where he originated or what became of him following his association with Billy the Kid. You'll often hear that French became a member of the Cook Gang out of Oklahoma and that he got killed in 1895. That's almost certainly not the case, as the French who rode with the Cook Gang was only like 7 or 8 years old during the Lincoln County War. So, will we see Alan Ruck in Young Guns 3? I have no idea. I hope so, but who knows? I'll tell you who I'd like to see, and that's Kiefer Sutherland, reprising the role of Josiah, Doc Scurlock. I don't think that's going to happen, though, especially considering that we all saw him basically riddled with bullets in Part 2. But hey, who knows? Maybe they can bring him back as Doc's evil twin brother, sort of like Jack Palance in City Slickers. By the way, the real Doc Scurlock lived even longer than Chavez, dying in July of 1929 at the age of 80. Okay, so now that we've got all that out of the way, let's talk about what we know concerning the plot of Young Guns 3, Dead or Alive. So Emilio Estevez did an interview recently with Josh Horowitz. I'll drop a link down below. Great interview, by the way. And much to my delight, he does reveal quite a lot more than I was expecting. According to Mr. Estevez, the plot will take place primarily in Mexico, on the eve of the Mexican Revolution. And Billy the Kid / Brushy Bill Roberts will be joining forces with Pancho Villa. Per Estevez, quote, "I become the Tunstall character in many ways, and I bring this group of young, mostly Latino young men through the paces. And then all hell breaks loose." End quote, and hell yeah, brother. In another part of the interview, he mentions a new group of regulators who are also mostly Hispanic and indigenous. When asked whether or not John Bon Jovi will be returning for Part 3, he just states that he's not allowed to say. And when asked if he'd like to have Bon Jovi contribute, he replied once again, "I'm not allowed to say." But he did add something very, very interesting. Quote, "John has remained a friend, and he's very enthusiastic about becoming involved in this. Very enthusiastic." And then just seconds later, when they're discussing the title of Young Guns 3, Dead or Alive, he says, "It begs the question, is he dead or is he alive?" It also tucks into John's song, Dead or Alive, so there's that little Easter egg. End quote. Interestingly enough, this will not be the end of the franchise. According to Estevez, there will be a Young Guns 4, possibly even a Part 5. And really, this was the most surprising part of the entire interview, for me at least, as I really did think this would be the end. But thankfully, that is not the case. Mr. Estevez also lets it slide that Pancho Villa is 28 years old when he and Billy the Kid hook up. Now, the real Pancho Villa was born in the summer of 1878. Ironically, right around the same time when Brushy Bill Roberts was also born, but that's neither here nor there. When Pancho was 28, however, is about the same time that Roberts claimed to have returned to Mexico. Quote, "I went back to Mexico about 1907, and 3 of us started another ranch known as the 3 Bar. In 1910, the revolution came along, and we had to start fighting again. We joined Carranza's men, and later with Pancho Villa." And that's really all Brushy had to say, other than that he left Mexico for good in 1914. Now, I know that's not a lot of information to work with, but it's way more than we had just a few days ago. And I'm particularly intrigued by the Dead or Alive Bon Jovi reference, which I do think can only mean one thing. Billy the Kid and Dave Rudabaugh are going to be crab fishermen off the coast of Alaska. Not really, but shout out to the 3 or 4 of you who actually caught that reference. And no, just based on what I do know about Brushy Bill Roberts and his various claims, and based on what Mr. Estevez shared in that interview, here's what I personally think we can expect from Young Guns 3. This is all just for fun, okay? I'm under no illusions that I'm anywhere near as creative as Emilio Estevez or even Young Guns creator John Fusco. Nothing like that. This is just a fun little thought exercise, and when the movie is finally released, we'll see how much I got right, if anything, and how much I got wrong. Okay, so my original prediction was that the movie would open up at the governor's mansion over at Santa Fe, with Old Man Brushy trying to obtain that pardon. Keep in mind that this is when I thought Part 3 would be the end of the franchise. But I'm sticking with it because I think it could still work. Also, I do think Brushy will be narrating the entire movie, sort of like in Guns 2. But yeah, they're in Santa Fe, and they're meeting with the governor, and it's not going well. It's sort of a dinner for schmucks type situation. Brushy's starting to get flustered, kind of like he did at the beginning of Part 2 when he called that attorney a chicken shit. I think things are going to get very tense. The camera's going to zoom in on Brushy, and then we'll flash back to Billy the Kid and Arkansas Dave dodging bullets in Cuba. Remember, prior to getting involved with Pancho Villa, Brushy did claim to have served with the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. I also think he and Dave are going to be bickering back and forth just like always. Only now, instead of debating whose gang it is, they'll be arguing over whose platoon it is. As soon as they leave Cuba is when they return to their ranch down in Old Mexico, only to learn that in their absence it was seized by authorities, along with all of their livestock. I think this is going to be the inciting incident that leads them to joining forces with Pancho Villa. But first, Billy and Dave are going to try to recruit their own new gang of regulators, comprised mostly of greenhorns who feel like they missed out on the glory days of the Old West. They're still going to need someone reliable, someone they can really count on. And that's where Lou Diamond Phillips comes into play. I would say that we'll see Billy and Rudabaugh bust Chavez out of prison, but now that I know there's going to be a Part 4 and possibly a Part 5, I think they'll most likely save that for later on. I also think Chavez will play a very important role in recruiting the locals, both the Hispanic and the indigenous. And when this new group of so-called regulators hooks up with Pancho Villa, that's when, to paraphrase Emilio Estevez, all hell breaks loose. The whole dead or alive Bon Jovi thing is really throwing me off, though. I don't know if he mentioned that on purpose, so assholes like myself spend the next year just trying to solve the riddle, or if the plot really is somehow intertwined with the actual song, Wanted Dead or Alive. This could be just a psychological thing, like Brushy escaping to the desert and reinventing himself, or maybe he feels like he's stuck in limbo and doesn't actually know if he's truly dead or alive. Also, the lyrics to the Bon Jovi song, you know how they go, on a steel horse I ride, and Brushy did say he was raising steel dust horses on his ranch down in Mexico. Yes, I know I'm overthinking all of this, but other than that, I really can't figure out what this Easter egg is. If you get a chance, give the song a listen and let me know if you have any ideas. Maybe it's right there in front of my face and I'm just missing it. And finally, because they're setting it up for a Part 4, I do think we'll see a Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett reunion. Now, as far as I can tell, Guns 3 is going to take place roughly around 1907 and 1908. And the real-life Pat Garrett was shot dead in January of 1909. So I'm thinking maybe that's how Part 3 will end, with Billy and Garrett meeting up for a final, somewhat bittersweet reunion. And then, of course, Garrett is murdered and Billy is devastated. No, he's not going to be murdered by Billy, okay? Keep in mind that they did part on mostly good terms at the end of Guns 2. And I actually think a big part of Part 4 will be Billy avenging Garrett's death. By the way, there was a lot of shit that went down when Garrett was killed, and I still don't think we know the entire story. Pat made some very powerful enemies over the years, including the rancher Oliver Lee and Senator Albert B. Fall. The guy who actually shot Garrett, Jesse Wayne Brazel, is considered by many to be a patsy, just some half-wit they talked into taking the blame. And then, just a few years later, Brazel himself would go missing, never to be seen again. There are also some who think that Garrett's true assassin was Deacon Jim Miller. Others think that he was killed on account of a human trafficking ring. Indeed, the only witness to the actual murder was an old boy named Carl Adamson. And Adamson, not long after Garrett's death, was convicted of smuggling Chinese laborers into the United States from Mexico. If you're curious to learn more, including Garrett's connection to the Roswell UFO crash, I do have an entire series on the man, Look, I know he oftentimes gets a very bad rap, but love him or hate him, Garrett did lead a fascinating life. And with all the drama surrounding his death, I find it very hard to believe that at least some of it won't be included in Young Guns 4 or possibly even the ending of Young Guns 3. So yeah, that's basically where we're at now. Still have no idea when the movie will be released. They haven't even started filming yet, so who knows? But hey, at least we've kind of sort of got an idea where the story's going to take us. So, just to reiterate, per Emilio Estevez, Brushy Bill Roberts and Billy the Kid are one and the same. Guns 3 will take place mostly in Mexico. Chavez and Rudabaugh will both be making an appearance, as will Pancho Villa, possibly even John Bon Jovi. And also, speaking of Bon Jovi, hidden somewhere deep in the bowels of Wanted, Dead or Alive is an Easter egg that will be central to the plot. And my predictions are that we'll see Billy the Kid fighting in Cuba, that we'll see old man Brushy Bill at the governor's mansion trying to get that pardon. We'll see Billy and Dave Rudabaugh working at a ranch down in Mexico. And we'll either see a reunion between Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, or they're at least going to set the stage for a reunion. But what do you think? Hit me up in the comments or shoot me an email. What do you think will occur in Guns 3, 4, and possibly even 5? Josh at wildwestextra.com. Now, one more thing. Speaking of Garrett's death, I don't think that Deacon Jim Miller killed him. I think it was Jesse Wayne Brazel. But I still think in Part 4, we're going to see a showdown between Billy the Kid and killer Jim Miller. And my, oh my, won't that be fun. Now, before we go, I should probably address the elephant in the room, Brushy Bill Roberts, especially in light of my very long history of helping to expose Roberts as a fraud. I'm not going to get into any of that here today, not really. Suffice it to say, there's no actual evidence supporting any of Brushy's claims. And in contrast, there is a ton of evidence showing that Garrett killed Billy the Kid in 1881. Look, Robert's story is very compelling, and I don't think any of us like the idea of Billy the Kid being cut down in his prime. We hear about all the evidence that Brushy had the same scars as Billy the Kid, that people who knew Billy swore that they were the same person, that he knew things nobody could have possibly known unless they were somehow involved in the Lincoln County War. And then we hear about all the mystery surrounding the kid's supposed death in 1881, that Garrett buried the corpse before anyone could get a good look at it, that one of his own deputies said he killed the wrong man, and that he never received the reward because he failed to provide sufficient proof. Like I said, very compelling. If all that's true that I just said, then there's no doubt about it. Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid. However, if you dig just a little deeper, you realize that everything I recounted a moment ago is either not true or taken completely out of context. If you're interested in learning about the real Brushy Bill Roberts, I do have an episode titled Brushy Bill is a Lying Liar, where I go over all of the evidence, the census records, the fraudulent affidavits, the supposed facial recognition study, and all of the various outrageous claims that Brushy made. I didn't even touch on half of it today. Dude said some pretty crazy stuff, up to and including claiming to have once saved a bunch of Texas Rangers from machine gun-toting gangsters. Also worth noting that he was friends with other proven frauds like J. Frank Dalton and Ora Woodman. Like I said, I go over all of that in Brushy Bill is a Lying Liar and much more, link down below. I've also got a couple of episodes where I examine the kid's death. Turns out Garrett did not bury the body before anyone could get a good look at it. And no, his deputy did not say he killed the wrong man. There was a public wake, there was a very public funeral, there was a coroner's jury report. Billy's death was very well documented. There were a ton of eyewitnesses. And the supposed mystery is really not a mystery at all. And yes, Garrett did receive the bounty on Billy the Kid's head. Matter of fact, he received it twice. This is all backed up by primary sources, okay? It's not just some guy on YouTube talking about some story he heard from his grandmother's cousin. If you're interested in learning more, check out Billy the Kid Debunked, link down below. And Was Billy the Kid's Death a Hoax? Also linked down below. You know, oftentimes with history, the myth becomes part of the story. And like it or not, Brushy Bill Roberts and Billy the Kid, they're forever intertwined now. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. I love this stuff. I may talk trash about Brushy Bill, but I'd be lying if I didn't say he was one of my favorite topics. even just the psychology behind it. You know, why we as humans believe the things we do. Confirmation bias, Occam's razor, how our brains can trick us into seeing things that aren't really there. These are all very fascinating topics, and it's all wrapped up in Brushy Bill Roberts. So, was Brushy Bill really Billy the Kid? Absolutely not. But will I be there opening day when Young Guns 3 hits the theaters? You bet your sweet ass I will. Will I continue pestering John Fusco to cast me as an extra in Part 3? Yes, I will. Or at least I will until he finally tells me to screw off. At the end of the day, I love Young Guns. I love talking about Billy the Kid, and by default, I also love talking about Brushy Bill Roberts. If for no other reason than him helping to stir up a little historical curiosity in a whole brand new generation. Okay? Without Brushy Bill Roberts, there would be no Young Guns 2. And without Young Guns 2, there's a very good chance there would be no Wild West Extravaganza. And for that, I am forever grateful. So big thank you to John Fusco. If you're not familiar, John's the guy that created the entire series. He wrote Guns 1 and Guns 2. I believe he's also a co-writer with Emilio Estevez on Guns 3. And big thanks to Mr. Estevez as well. You can tell he's really passionate about the story. He's even on record as saying that Billy the Kid is one of his favorite characters of all time. And let's face it, the guy's just amazing at what he does. I think people forget how awesome Emilio Estevez was back during the day. I mean, damn, The Breakfast Club, Repo Man, Judgment Night, Mighty Ducks, Men at Work, The War at Home. Make no mistake about it, Emilio Estevez is a goddamn living legend. And his excitement regarding Young Guns is very refreshing. He's not just taking this job for a paycheck. He's doing it because he enjoys the story and he's passionate about it. And I'm here for it. I'm also very happy that Lou Diamond Phillips and Christian Slater have also agreed to reprise their roles. I'm really excited to see all these guys working together. And yeah, that's about all I've got regarding Young Guns 3 Dead or Alive. My apologies to everyone who was waiting on the episode to drop over the weekend. I had several technical difficulties, ended up having to re-record the entire thing, but better late than never, right? As far as new content goes, everything is proceeding as planned. I've got a couple of scripts nearly completed, ready to record, and we should be on schedule for early May. I'm also going to go ahead and release the compilation of our recent series on Jesse James. I was going to put that off for another few months, but people are asking for it now. I am a man of the people, so I figured why the hell not. So look for that to hit your feed next Wednesday. And if you're still itching for some more Old West history talk, I have been posting a lot more over at the Wild West Extravaganza Patreon. I actually recently uploaded a video tour of my recording studio, air quote studio. So if you've ever wanted to take a look at my bookshelf or the art hanging on my wall, now's your chance. I've even been uploading these little voice memos. They're not much. It's just me talking about a number of topics, completely unscripted. I have one where I discuss authenticating Old West photos. I got another where I share a story about an old man who lived near my grandparents back in the 1940s. I have another where I talk about Bloody Beaver Podcast. Believe it or not, that was the original name of the Wild West Extravaganza. Why Bloody Beaver? Well, you're going to have to join the Patreon to find out. And I've got another I'll be uploading probably today, maybe tomorrow, all about my history with podcasting and why I decided to start this show in the first place. You can find all that and more over at patreon.com/Wild West Extra, including the entire back catalog of the Wild West Extravaganza. All the really early cringy stuff. You think I suck now? You wouldn't believe how bad I was when I first started. Everything on Patreon, completely ad-free, by the way, so no pesky commercials. That's patreon.com/Wild West Extra. All right, and I guess that's about all I've got. Until next time, remember, you're Billy the Kid too, you know. We all are. Dirty little Billy bastards. Adios.